Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterist Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, Eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Two Guys in the Bible right here on Fulfill Radio. I'm William Bell. Apologize for being just a couple of minutes late. Got distracted and almost forgot, but I'm here. And thanks to Doug Preston for being here like 2 minutes before I got in. No, I'm just kidding, ladies and gentlemen. He was probably already here for a while. At any rate, we're delighted to be with you, and I'm glad that Skype worked and everything worked so I could get in tonight. But, Don, how are you doing? I was
doing
waiting
great, William.
That phone call from you saying, where are you?
Yeah, well, I thought and I assumed that you had probably gotten so tied up and busy. We all know, and I probably know better than most, but know how incredibly busy you are. You've got about 42 different irons in the fire. I don't know how in the world you do everything. Pretty remarkable. But, yeah, it's good to be with you as always. Been a super hectic week already for me with just the normal activities, doing some writing, doing some fantastic research. You know, William, I've been reading a couple of different, I've got this nasty habit of having about 8 or 10 books open and earmarked, as it were, and I'll read 7 or 8, 10 pages from one book, and I'll lay it down, and I'll think, oh, yeah, I need to read from this book now. And so my footstool here do what?
I said, you have the same disease. I said, do you have the same disease?
Yes, I do. Yeah, you know exactly how that goes. And but nonetheless, I have been reading one particular book, Resurrection in Early Judaism. Very fascinating book chronicling the very different, we very often hear from our opponents, the adversaries of covenant eschatology. The Jews believed in physical resurrection, except the Sadducees. Well, as a matter of fact, in one particular work that I was reading today, it happens to be a PDF study by John Collins. If I remember that particular PDF study, I've got about 7 or 8 PDF studies that have been sent to me just recently. Had some fantastic stuff being sent to me. May not have been John Collins, may have been another author, but nonetheless, the author was stating it is simply wrong to say the Jews to believe X, Y, or Z in regard to resurrection, because there are at least 5 or 6 different varying views about resurrection that were held among early Jews. And so when we hear from our adversaries and say, well, the Jews believe this or that or the other, according to true scholars, we have a right to ask, well, which Jews are you talking about? Which group, which branch, and which belief in the resurrection are you talking about? And then in this one book that I've been spending time with here at the house this afternoon specifically, Resurrection in Early Judaism. what is interesting to me is how it chronicles the development, and that's the only word that you can use for it, the development of their views on Hades and life after death, and how varied their views of life after death truly were.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, what's remarkable about that is that some of our adversaries, some opponents of covenant eschatology, have just come down hard and fast and said, well, we just don't believe there's such a thing as Hades. That's an unbiblical view. And yet these are the same individuals who claim to stand and to walk in the path of the early church, to even hold the views that were widespread in ancient Judaism. Well, the indisputable fact is that the early Jews believed in Hades as a place of consciousness, and they believed, and even the Greeks believed in this, and such philosophers as Socrates and Plato believed in Hades as a place of either bliss or darkness and gloom. And so, again, it's remarkable. And, oh, by the way, the early church fathers followed suit in that. And so, so once again, when our opponents tell us that they walk in the footsteps of the early church writers and that they stand with the historic church, and yet they reject the idea of Hades. And, oh, by the way, some of these very early Jewish writers, even some of these very early Christian writers, believed that resurrection was the transference from Hades into heaven without a body, that is, without a physical body. They called being taken out of Hades and being taken to heaven resurrection, which is something that our opponents vehemently deny. And they say we're heretics for believing that. So anyway, as I said, been doing an awful lot of fascinating research, and it's just so revealing and interesting to see all the very different views of the afterlife and of resurrection, pardon me, that were held in the ancient times. And one of the things that I encountered from a highly, highly respected scholar by the name of John Collins, in his commentary on the book of Daniel, he was commenting that there was in ancient Judaism a widespread belief in resurrection. However, he makes the interesting observation that the claim that the Jews invariably believed in bodily resurrection is a view that really has to be re-examined. And so here is a pardon?
I said I certainly agree with that based on the studies I've done.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, the more I study these ancient sources, the more that it is glaringly apparent that view can be challenged, and challenged on very, very firm scholarship. And so it it just shows how the opponents of covenant eschatology are the ones who are, in fact, taking the somewhat naive view, the view that scholarship is increasingly rejecting when they say there was a universal belief in resurrection among the ancients, both Jews and Christians alike. You may make that statement, but then you're going to have to back it up and to be able to prove that they all believed what you claim to believe. And that becomes another matter altogether different, and one that is, in fact, incredibly challenging to those, quote, traditional views of resurrection within the modern church. So, like I said, just fascinating stuff. I was talking to Brother Dallas Burdett the other day, and as you know, Dallas is quite a scholar. and he just reads prodigiously. And he and I were talking about the joy and the thrill of learning just recently. And I said, there's not a day goes by that I do not learn something, that I am not challenged in my traditional views, that I am not thrilled to discover more about what the ancients actually believed. Pardon me. And, that I am challenged to constantly rethink everything that I've ever been taught in many ways. And I know that you feel the same way about it. This process of learning never ends. I was sharing, a guy called me up from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He's been involved in a study of Revelation, and he told me he'd been involved in a study of Revelation for about the last 2 years. And I said, oh, so now you're in verse 4 of chapter 1, huh? He thought that was kind of funny. But anyway, he said, well, I'm trying to read from all these different authors. And he said, I've been reading one book on Revelation by a Church of Christ minister by the name of Wayne Jackson. Do you happen to know this guy? And I couldn't help but laugh. And so I told him some stories about my interrelationship and my past relationship and past friendship with Wayne Jackson and what have you. And he made the comment that he is in this really, really steep learning curve, that he had never realized the vast scope of the study of eschatology. And it's just an everyday learning experience. And yet he's finding it so discomforting to engage with and to talk with. He has not talked to Wayne Jackson, he said, but he said, I've encountered some people that when you when you challenge their traditional views, he said, boy, they just, wow. He said, it's remarkable the response you get, the anger of the responses that you get, because it's like they just simply don't want to give up anything, and they don't want to change anything in their traditional views. And I said, well, I can share an anecdote with you. I attended the Pearl Street lectureship in Denton, Texas, some years ago. There was a pretty prominent minister of the Churches of Christ that was speaking on that lectureship, and his topic was the AD 70 heresy. And he kind of laughed. He said, oh, I'm sure he said, that really sounds like it was going to be an objective examination of the doctrine. I said, oh, yeah. I said, you just have to know the preacher. And it's our friend Terry Varner that you have encountered yourself, William. And I said, my wife and I were sitting in the audience, and Brother Varner said, these people, referring to us preterists, are nothing but change agents. Everything they say wants us to change. And he said, I want to tell you right now, I've been preaching the gospel for 50 years, and I haven't changed one single thing that I believed 50 years ago. And I said, I turned to my wife, and I said, in a voice that could obviously be heard, then I guess he stopped studying 50 years ago. I said, I had people turning around and looking at me like, who in the world are you? And blah, blah, blah. But I said, I didn't care. I said, a man who says he hasn't changed anything in his theology, in his beliefs, after 50 years of study, stopped studying the Bible 50 years ago. And that's just all there is to it. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. But it was a really interesting conversation with this gentleman who is really, really fascinated with the study of covenant eschatology and the things that he is learning. So yeah, it's been a good week already, William. What's going on in your world?
Well, not much. Just basically trying to stay on top of all the things that I do, and just had dealing with the TV program, the radio program, et cetera. Haven't had many conversations at this point, other than individuals. I've had some guys from Africa, like in a group. I've been doing some discussions with them, and they're coming along, pretty well, which is good. Kind of working out some of the basic questions that you have when you begin to learn eschatology. Dealing with all of the initial objections that they receive,
Sure.
And so we've been kind of working through those. And he's making, very good progress. And so I'm excited about that and hearing that some others are getting involved as well. And then I've had, a few calls from people who are in the States. Some had some rather unique opinions about some things in eschatology, even though they have come to understand the preterist point of view. There are some positions that they have that are, I would consider to be a little unorthodox, you might say, in terms of just their views on things within the fulfilled perspective. But nevertheless, we leave them open to study and to investigate things, and hopefully, some of those things will kind of work themselves out along the way. But that's kind of what's happening in my neck of the land, and so not very much above that, but that's enough to keep me going.
Yeah, folks, I got to tell you, normally William and I talk very, very regularly, either through email or phone call, and I had some things I wanted to throw by him over the last week or so, and I sent him an email, no response. I tried calling him several times, no response. I tried voice message, no response. I tried text messaging, no response. And I'm going, what in the world is going on here? He must have left town, or I don't know what happened. So this morning I sent him a text, and I reiterated that. I said, I've emailed you, no response. I've sent you text, no response, and I've called you, no response. So I said, what's up? And so finally we called and made a little bit of contact today, but it's really, really unusual. I knew that he had to be absolutely just snowed under for him not to respond, because, like I said, we often talk on the phone just pretty frequently, and we email back and forth with a good degree of regularity. So when I didn't hear anything at all, it's like, oh, my goodness, is he okay? What's going on? But it's just William's world. He's just ultra, ultra busy. So anyway, here we are. Well, William, we're still in Isaiah 65. And, I mean, look, Isaiah 65 is such an incredible, incredible text. It's one of those Old Testament prophecies that, among a raft of others, just kind of turned my world upside down years and years ago. Because, I mean, I knew, and a little bit of background here, I wrote a paper, oh, my goodness, this had to be in 77, 78, somewhere along in there. I wrote a paper on the new heaven and new earth of 2 Peter chapter 3. It was really just my personal research that I was putting on paper as I developed it. And I shared it with a couple of friends. So this paper is about 50 pages long. And every time I shared it with some of my friends, my preaching peers, they wound up, unbeknownst to me, sharing it with others.
Oh,
and the next thing you knew, I was getting requests from preachers I had never heard of before in distant states saying, hey, I've heard about this paper you wrote. I want to read this. Can you send me a copy? Well, in my continuing research, the paper grew to something like 100 pages. word of that paper got to the director of a preacher study day that was held in a town, about 75, 80 miles from me, Chickasha, Oklahoma. And the preacher there, the organizer of this preacher study day, which was held about once a month, once every 2 months, whatever. And it was a forum in which ground-based foundational rule was you don't call anybody a heretic. This is a study day. This is for open-mindedness. This is for exchange of ideas. We do not condemn one another. Well, word of that paper got to the organizer, and he called me up, and he said, "Hey, Don, I've heard about a paper on 2 Peter chapter 3 that you've written that's a lot of guys are really interested in, and I've had some of them calling me up asking if we could get you here to give a presentation." Well, William, I don't have to tell you what it's like to be asked to give a presentation on a subject that you know very well is not well received and that is considered very, very controversial. And but again, by this time, word of this paper had spread and spread and spread. And I don't know how many copies of that paper that I had distributed up to that point, but I told the organizer, I said, "Well, yeah, I'll give a presentation on it." I said, "It'll sure have to be brief because each man was allotted, like 45 minutes to an hour." And I said, "I certainly won't be able to answer everybody's questions." He said, "No, that's all right." He said, "We'd just like to hear what you have to say because it sounds really interesting." Okay, so I went. I gave the presentation. And I have to tell you, there were 80-some guys there, which was almost double what it normally was. So I'm thinking, uh-oh, this might be trouble all by itself. And so I gave the presentation. And amazingly enough, it was extremely well received. In the Q&A session, literally nobody even tried to call me a heretic. There was one guy that you could tell from his body language was not real pleased, but he knew the rules of the forum. And so he didn't just speak up and say what was on his mind. He did later in different forums. He called me a heretic, false teacher, etc. But nonetheless, as a result of that presentation, I distributed another 100 plus copies of that manuscript. And it just continued to go. Now, I say all of that because in my study of 2 Peter chapter 3, Isaiah 65 and 66 impressed itself upon me so powerfully. Because after all, Peter says, according to his promise, we look for a new heaven and a new earth. Now remember, folks, in our ongoing study of the Messianic Temple is the Messianic Kingdom temple. It's the temple of the kingdom of God. It is Isaiah 65. Even though, as we pointed out, the word temple is not found in Isaiah 65, nonetheless, the indictment against Israel in Isaiah 65 is, "You are those who forget my holy mountain." They were abusing the temple, which is exactly what Jesus and Stephen and Paul and the New Testament writers accused the Jews of doing in his day, or in their day. But Isaiah 65, in my studies on 2 Peter chapter 3, I just kept running up against it. I could not escape it. Everywhere I looked at Isaiah 65, I saw it being echoed and quoted and cited in the New Testament, not just in 2 Peter 3, but as I shared last week, Romans 9:24, Romans 10:20. The New Testament writers very clearly saw Isaiah 65 as one of the key eschatological prophecies in their narrative. And so I would suggest to you folks that any eschatology that does not give proper place to Isaiah 65 and Isaiah 66 is not a proper eschatology. And William, you know as well as I do, when we have presented Isaiah 65, 66 in formal public debates, in internet discussions, I mean, it becomes one of those, oh my goodness, I don't want to talk about this passage. I want to talk about something else. Or they tell us, well, that was fulfilled in the return from Babylonian captivity. Or something similar to that, which creates unbelievable difficulties. I mean, how you could say that Isaiah 65 and Isaiah 66 was fulfilled in the return in the Babylonian destruction and in the return from Babylonian captivity, I must confess, is way beyond me. I just fail to see it, and to say that Isaiah 65 gives traditional eschatologies incredible difficulty is just a humongous understatement. William, I don't know if you remember the paper or not, but many years ago, Wayne Jackson, a few moments ago, Wayne Jackson wrote an article in his Christian Courier paper commenting on Isaiah chapter 65, and he said, this passage is to be understood as predictive of the church triumphant over the old covenant, heaven and earth of Judaism, and the sweeping away, the destruction of old covenant Judaism in AD 70. I've got that in my files, by the way.
Doesn't he have that in his book? Doesn't he have that in his book on Isaiah?
I believe you're right. I believe you're exactly right. And needless to say, I mean, folks, this is incredible. Here is Wayne Jackson, who for years now, Wayne Jackson's health is extremely bad. He had cancer, has been struggling with cancer for years. I don't even know what his current status is as far as health, but I know it's probably not very good. But some years ago, when he was such an outspoken critic of covenant eschatology, and folks, you got to remember, I considered Wayne Jackson a friend at one time. We corresponded very regularly at one time. But when he realized that I had espoused covenant eschatology, I mean, it was over. I mean, I'm a heretic, false teacher, and I'm doomed to hell. And that's just all there was to it. No more correspondence. He would not answer any more questions. I mean, it was just simply over. It was amazing that he wouldn't even try to retrieve me from my error. I mean, literally, no correspondence. It was just simply over. So here is Wayne Jackson, an incredibly outspoken critic of covenant eschatology, who admitted that Isaiah 65 predicted the destruction of the old covenant, heaven and earth, of old covenant Israel in AD 70, and the triumph of the new creation of Jesus Christ in AD 70. Now, you can well understand that anyone who wrote such a thing would then be absolutely, adamantly opposed to standing on a debate platform with me when he knew that I knew of those quotes. At one time, I had every copy, every edition of his paper, Christian Courier. I had his book, The AD 70 Theory, which William will tell you is one of the poorest written, poorest attempts at refutation of covenant eschatology. I mean, it almost seems that every time somebody comes out with another attempt to refute covenant eschatology, that we just shake our head and go, that's as bad as it gets. You wouldn't think it could get any worse, but sometimes it does. But at the time Wayne Jackson's book was written, it was one of the worst out there. And Wayne was challenged not only by me personally and by me face to face, shaking his hand, challenging him to a debate. He was challenged no less than 10, perhaps as many as 15 times, to meet me in formal public debate, and he adamantly refused. Well, like I said, you can easily see why he would not want to meet me in public debate, knowing that he had said that the new heaven and new earth of Isaiah 65 came into reality in AD 70, and the new heaven, the old heaven and old earth was swept away, destroyed in AD 70, and the new heaven and new earth of Christ's church, the body, came into full bloom in AD 70. Yeah, if I had written that, but I was trying to teach that there is a yet future new heaven and new earth based on 2 Peter chapter 3, I wouldn't want to stand on a debate platform either and try to justify that kind of doctrine. Now, I want everyone to think about this. As I have pointed out many, many times so far in this study, we can focus on the terminology of the new heaven and new earth. And we may forget for the moment that inextricably bound up with the new heaven and new earth, absolutely inseparably bound up with the New Jerusalem, is the new temple, the Messianic Temple. Now, if you're going to, as our postmillennial friends, as the Reformed amillennial people do, if you are going to take the position of men such as N.T. Wright, and of David Hester, with whom I had 2 formal public debates, if you're going to take the position that one of these days we're going to have a literal physical new heaven and new earth, then you've got to, upon the same identical hermeneutic, say, and William, tell me if this is right or wrong. Tell me where this is misguided. You've got to argue that there will be another literal physical New Jerusalem, and by the way, you ought to be arguing that at the time of the creation of the literal physical new heaven and new earth, a literal physical New Jerusalem, there will also be a new physical temple in Jerusalem, with Jesus sitting on literal physical throne. Now, my question is, if that's not true, why is it not true? William, I'll let you address that.
No, I agree totally. I mean, if you're going to go that route, I mean, we've said it all the time, when they talk about the new heavens and new earth being literal, why, and they want to say you're going to get a new heaven, but they never talk about a new earth, which is a part of the equation, and you just carried it to its, logical end with stretching it out to include, the new city of Jerusalem, the new temple, etc. And with that, of course, there you go with a literal priesthood and literal sacrifices. I mean, if you're going to take it from that direction.
Yeah, you've got to have the literal observance of the feast days according to Zechariah 14, because according to Zechariah 14, after the day of the Lord, what do you have? You have all the nations of the earth going up to Jerusalem. Well, that's the New Jerusalem, and in this new paradigm, or of this literalistic paradigm of a literal new heaven, it's got to be a literal Jerusalem. Well, if it's a literal Jerusalem, then it's the nations going up to Jerusalem there to literally observe the Feast of Tabernacle. Oh, and by the way, not just the Feast of Tabernacle, but all of the other feast days of the Jewish calendar, which really, really, really raises the question, because according to Ezekiel 40 to 48, in this Messianic temple, no one who is uncircumcised will be able to worship there. Oh, wow. So if the new heaven and new earth is literal, physical, and that's what Sam Frost currently believes, then the New Jerusalem is literal and physical. And as you just pointed out, the priesthood has got to be literal and physical. And if the priesthood is literal, then circumcision is literal, and the observance of the feast days is literal. If not, why not? On Facebook just recently, I've had all of these guys that are constantly attacking us as heretics, they literally don't want to talk about the Messianic Temple. They literally don't want to talk about it. They want to talk about the resurrection, and that they stand with Paul because Paul said he was a Pharisee, and the Pharisees believed in literal physical resurrection. Well, as I pointed out, it's also true, if you're going to argue there has to be physical resurrection because Paul said he was a Pharisee, well, guess what? The Pharisees likewise believed. In fact, in one of the books that I've been reading over the last few days, this is one of those cases where I've been reading so many different books, I don't remember exactly which book this was in, but but the author just took note of the fact that it was a standard view among the Essenes, the Dead Sea community, that they believe. Oh, I know which book that was in. I have to remember that now. They believed in the restoration, at the day of the Lord. They believed in a literal, physical, nationalistic restoration of Jerusalem. They believed in the literal, physical restoration of Jerusalem. They believed in the literal, physical restoration of a purified Levitical priesthood offering animal sacrifices. And, by the way, the Messiah was going to whip the Romans, kill all the Romans. And so when I've asked these individuals, since you claim to believe what the Pharisees believed, then guess what? Here's what the Pharisees believed. Upon what basis do you say, well, I accept the concept of physical resurrection, but I reject their concept of the kingdom? Because guess what? The kingdom and the resurrection are of the same identical nature. They are synonymous in their establishment and their occurrence. So don't talk to me about belief in physical resurrection, but it's a spiritual kingdom. You can't have physical resurrection without a physical kingdom, which means, back to the points we just got through making, it's a physical city, it's a physical temple, it's a physical priesthood, it's physical sacrifices in this physical new heaven and new earth. I mean, they just literally pick and choose. They cherry pick what they want to espouse based upon their statement. Well, Paul said he was a Pharisee. Pharisees believed X, therefore X must be true because Paul said he accepted it. But they forget about A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P that the Pharisees also believed in, and they just wave their hand at it as if these other tenets and these other elements that the Pharisees definitely believed in was of no consequence. Got to be physical resurrection? Oh, but, I don't believe in a physical kingdom. I don't believe in a physical Jerusalem. I don't believe in a physical temple. I don't believe in a literal physical priesthood. Well, why not? It's what the Pharisees believed. And so this concept of the temple, all of that leading up to this, if a person goes to Isaiah 65 and says, oh, yeah, that's going to be a literal physical new heaven and new earth. Once again, that demands that it's a literal physical Jerusalem as the capital, and it also demands a literal physical temple, because let's take note of this. In Isaiah chapter 65, verse 25. Now, I'm skipping over a bunch of stuff that we will have to come back to probably on another program. But it says, and again, this is Isaiah 65:25. The wolf and the lamb shall feed together, pardon me, and the lion shall eat straw like the bullock, and dust shall be the serpent's feet. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, says the Lord. Now, folks, the holy mountain here is the Temple Mount. Remember, earlier in the chapter, the Lord castigated and condemned the people of Israel because you are they which forget my holy mountain. They were abusing the temple. But he closes the chapter, which means, by the way, all of this is kind of an inclusio. He closes the chapter by saying, they will not hurt nor destroy in all of my holy mountain. That means there's going to be a Messianic temple of power and glory, but it's the Messianic temple. Back to the point. If the new heaven and new earth is physical and geopolitical, then the New Jerusalem is geopolitical, literal, physical. And that means it's got to be a literal, physical temple. And yet, you cannot get a postmillennialist, as far as I know. When I debated Joel McDermott in our correspondence back and forth, he was adamant that the temple of God is the spiritual temple of the church, and there will never be a physical temple. William, how does that logic work? Can you explain that to me while I get a drink of water here?
I can't figure out how that's going to work. If you're going to make these things physical, then you're going to have to logically follow through with, physical all the way through. But and that's the end result of taking those, positions where you see these things as being physical. If it's going to be a physical temple, if it's going to be a physical kingdom, if it's going to be a physical priesthood. And, of course, we got groups out there who argue for those very things. And even, in the case with your debate with Joel McDermott, arguing for this literal physical restoration of Abraham to land and as the fulfillment, of the prophecies in 1 Corinthians and in the prophecies in Hebrews chapter 11. So, that just didn't work out very well for him in the discussion, but that's where it leads to. When you're going to take that, that physical premise, you're going to end up with making all of these things physical, and that just doesn't work. And one of the biggest reasons why it doesn't work is because the Lord threw a big, you might say, chink in the chain by adding these imminent time statements that just clearly, demonstrate that's not the case. I was presenting some information on, on the parable of the tares, and I know you've covered this quite a bit. But one of the things that's said in connection with the preparatory or introductory part of that parable, when he goes back to Isaiah and he talks about those who were blind and could not see, they had eyes, they could not see, they had ears, they could not hear. But then he tells the disciples, he says, but blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For many wise men and prophets desire to see the things which you now see and hear, and they did not see them, but you see them. Now, what did the prophets talk about? They talked about the kingdom. They talked about the sufferings of Christ. They talked about all those things, and yet here's the Lord saying the disciples saw them, meaning that they were being fulfilled right in their lifetime. So that would demonstrate, of course, in the case of, the sufferings of Christ, you've got that being fulfilled, but when it comes down to the kingdom being established, that's something altogether, because it would not come with observation. Yet it was still in their lifetime, as 1 Peter 1:10 through 12 says.
Oh, yeah. Pardon me. It's great observations. It just continues to stagger me of how desperate the opponents of covenant eschatology continue to be on an everyday basis. Just a real quick anecdote here. I don't know if you've had any time whatsoever to follow the exchange between Sam Frost and myself on Facebook over the last week or so. Sam posted that, boy, he just loves the Greek, and he had just discovered a gem that he had never seen before on Matthew chapter 24 and 21, in which Jesus was talking about the Great Tribulation. And the text reads that in the day of the Great Tribulation, which would be subsequent and consequent from the setting up of the abomination of desolation, but Jesus said, in those days, that's the days of the abomination of desolation, shall be great tribulation, such as has never been since the beginning of a creation until now or ever yet shall be. And Sam Frost came up with the statement and with the comment that what Jesus was saying is that tribulation had always been, and yet tribulation would end at the end of time. Well, of course, Matthew 24:21 doesn't say one word about the end of time. And then, right, I mean, over a period of 2 days, William, over a period of just 2 days, Sam Frost changed his argument from saying that Matthew chapter 24:21 says there has never been a tribulation like this from the beginning of the creation until now, and he made a fatal mistake of saying that's Jesus's, his now, nor ever yet shall be, and shall end at the end of time, to changing. I mean, within 2 days of changing to make it saying that he was comparing the great tribulation that was going to happen, greater than anything that had ever been or that would ever be again. And I'm going, okay, within a period of 2 days, you change your entire argument. You go from there shall be tribulation such as has never been since the beginning of the creation, and all tribulation shall end at the end of time, to arguing there shall be great tribulation such as has never been since the beginning of the creation until now, and nothing like it will ever be again. Folks, that's two diametrically different, diametrically opposed positions in 2 days by the same writer. He evidently can't remember from one day to the next what he writes and what he believes. And all of this, you see, is because Sam Frost is trying to put the tribulation now off in our time. I don't know what he believes the Great Tribulation will be. He must take it as the end of time, and he must take it to be saying that all tribulation will come to an end in the greatest tribulation the world has ever seen at the end of time. But again, he rejected that earlier claim and said, no, Jesus is just comparing the Great Tribulation, and of necessity, the grammar of Matthew 24:21, the grammar of necessity demands that the Great Tribulation belong to Jesus' day. Because the grammar is there has never been, or there should be great tribulation, such as has never been. And the Greek is indeed, the grammar is indeed comparing what had gone before with what was to be. There's no question about it. It is a comparison between the tribulation that Jesus was predicting and any and all tribulations that had gone before. Okay? And so, here's the kicker. There shall be great tribulation, such as has never been since the beginning of creation until the now. That's the literal Greek. Until the now. That's Jesus's generation. That's his time. But then he says, nor ever yet shall be. And by the way, every English translation that I have been able to find, which is 57 translations, agrees that Jesus was comparing the great tribulation that was coming in the now time with any tribulation that might come. Now, in the first place, I don't believe Jesus was speaking in some woodenly literalistic manner. Okay? He was using typical Hebraic hyperbole, metaphoric language that was not intended to be taken literally. And thus, when Sam Frost and William Vincent and others scoff and say, well, evidently Preston believes that AD 70 was worse than World War II. Yeah, right. LOL. They're just indulging in this dispensational hermeneutic of wooden literalism, and completely ignoring the very nature of Hebrew poetic language, hyperbole. But again, the grammar of the text demands, doesn't just hint or imply or suggest. It demands that the tribulation that Jesus was talking about was greater than, and we'll just use the comparative nature of it, even though, again, it's hyperbole, it doesn't destroy the time element. Greater than anything that had gone before until Jesus' day. And greater than anything after Jesus' day. That demands, grammatically, syntactically, it demands that the tribulation was going to happen in Jesus' day. Now, the power of that, folks, let's apply this to the Messianic Temple, shall we? The Messianic Temple would fully arrive, be fully established, consummated, perfected at the day of the Lord. I don't know of anybody really honestly that would totally deny that. So the Messianic Temple, that would be Isaiah 65, would be perfected at the day of the Lord. Okay, now follow me this here. The great tribulation of which Jesus spoke had to occur in the now time. In other words, his generation. Because the tribulation of which Jesus spoke was greater than anything that had happened before the now time. And it was greater than any other tribulation that would come after the now time. I hope I'm being clear here, William. Am I expressing this clearly?
I understand it. Before the now time or after the now time of Christ.
Exactly right. So the Great Tribulation had to occur in Jesus' the now time. But the parousia of Christ would occur immediately after the tribulation that Jesus was predicting, the tribulation for the now time. Therefore, the parousia of Christ had to occur in Jesus' the now time, not any time after Jesus' the now time. Now, I posted that argument 3 or 4 days ago. I'm still waiting on Sam Frost or William Vincent or any of the rest of them to respond to it. I suspect I'll be waiting a good little while longer, to be honest about it, because their habit is when you demonstrate the utter fallacy of their futurism, when you turn their own arguments against them, and you show how, well, basically they impaled themselves on their own arguments. I mean, you know, Sam Frost said Jesus was comparing the tribulation that he was talking about with everything before and everything after. Okay, but when was the tribulation to happen? In the now time. Hello. That demands that the parousia was going to be in Jesus' the now time. I don't see how that's escapable, William. Do you?
I don't. I mean, it's so very clear.
And I think they see that because, like I said, I posted that argument. I think it was about 3 days ago, and I'm still waiting for an answer. I'm still waiting for a response. Oh, but I'm not going to forget it. I'm going to post it again and say, hello. Hey, guys, you seem to have overlooked this. Oh, I know. You just got so busy you forgot to address it. I know you intended to, but you didn't. So here it is again, so answer it now. And so, I'm sorry. I can't help myself. When you see the utter fallacy of their arguments, when it's so easy to turn their own arguments against them and to show that their own arguments are fatal to their own paradigm. I must confess it's fun, not because I rejoice in exposing the error of other people. That's not the point. You know, it's not all about winning an argument. In reality, it is showing for those who are reading, who are auditing, who are never commenting, but who are wanting to learn. It's demonstrating to those people that covenant eschatology is in fact the truth of God's word. It's not an academic exercise. It's not an intellectual exercise. It's not just a debate exercise. It's all about God's truth. And it's all about exposing the fallacy and exposing, in some instances, the utter hypocrisy of those who are resisting God's word. So on the one level, it's kind of fun. On another level, it's really sad when you see people that you know in the past have espoused the truth, they've taught the truth, and now they've abandoned the truth for their own personal reasons. And, you know, one can only shake your head and marvel and in wonderment how anyone could abandon the truth when it's so clear. And you wind up having to argue and to say things like Sam Frost did early last year, when he said, I don't care what the Bible has to say about when the end was supposed to be. Now, just think about that, folks. How could anybody say? Now, according to Doug Wilkinson, there are over 250 time statements in the New Testament, indicative of the imminence of the end, the imminence of the judgment, the resurrection, the kingdom, salvation, etc., etc. And now you have men who are willing to openly write on Facebook, I don't care what the Bible has to say about time statements. That shows you how far people can go and are willing to go when they abandon the truth. It's just, it tears at the heart. It saddens the heart. And all a person can do is to expose that, to demonstrate to people who are reading the exchanges, who are seeing the claims made by these individuals. And in many instances, as you well know, William, to see the acerbic, the hateful, the caustic, and even the blatantly dishonest way that these people act. Sometimes the only thing that we can do is just simply expose the error, and expose the wounds, as it were, and to show to the world how ridiculous, how absurd, how illogical, how unscriptural the positions are that they are now espousing. And with that, folks, I think we've run out of time. I hope that you could see the thread, the theme, the motifs of the Messianic Temple with everything that we've said tonight, in contrast to the idea of a nationalistic, physical, new heaven and new earth, new Jerusalem, new temple. It's all about a spiritual creation in Christ Jesus. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for joining us here on Two Guys and a Bible on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. And as always, William, great to be with you. And with that, I will say good night and God bless.
Thank you for joining the Two Guys and a Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Dunn Preston and myself, we'd like to say have a very pleasant day and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.